The grass smelled like surrender. It was that specific, sharp scent of chlorophyll and dirt that only exists when you are lying face down in your own front lawn, your cheek pressed against the soil, sweating through a t-shirt that was definitely too gray to be considered neighborhood appropriate by the vultures circling the cul-de-sac. The sun was beating down on the back of my neck, a relentless, humid weight that made the air feel like soup. But the heat wasn't the reason I was paralyzed. The reason I was paralyzed was currently standing 6 inches from my nose. Specifically, it was a pair of beige, orthopedic loafers with thick rubber soles, the kind that squeaked on pavement and signaled the arrival of doom. "You're doing it wrong, David," the voice said. It wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was a calm, disappointed drone, like a school principal telling you that you've let down not just your parents, but the entire concept of education. If you pull from the wrist, you snap the root. You have to pull from the shoulder. Vertical extraction. It's in the newsletter. I squeezed my eyes shut, inhaling the scent of fescue and defeat. "Patty," I said into the dirt. "I am pulling weeds. I am removing the dandelions. Isn't that what you wanted? You sent me a letter. It had a stamp on it. A red stamp. It said urgent. I am being urgent." "You are being haphazard," she corrected. I heard the mechanical whir click of a device being extended. My stomach dropped. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, wiping a mixture of sweat and grit from my forehead, and looked up. Patricia. Patty Vance, president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association, Grand Inquisitor of the suburbs, and the reason my blood pressure medication had recently been doubled was looming over me. She wore her uniform, a floral blouse that looked like it had been upholstered onto her body, khaki capris that ended exactly 3 inches below the knee, and a visor that shielded her eyes, but did nothing to hide the terrifying set of her jaw. In her hand, she held it. The weapon. A digital caliper. Aerospace grade. The kind of tool machinists use to measure the tolerance of piston rings in jet engines. Patty used it to measure grass height and, apparently, weed trajectory. She crouched down, her knees popping audibly, and inserted the prongs of the caliper around the base of a dandelion stem I had just loosened but not yet extracted. She squinted at the digital readout. 45 degrees, she whispered, shaking her head. Unbelievable. "It's a weed, Patty," I snapped, finally sitting up and brushing grass clippings off my chest. "It doesn't have geometry. It's unwanted vegetation. I'm killing it." Section 4, Paragraph C, Subsection 2 of the Oak Haven Bylaws clearly states that extraction of noxious flora must be complete and total, ensuring no root mass remains to disturb the subterranean soil aesthetics, she recited. She didn't need to look at a book. She had the bylaws tattooed on her soul. "When you pull at a 45-degree angle, David, you shear the taproot. You leave 20% of the biomass in the dirt. It rots. It creates sinkholes. Do you want sinkholes, David? Do you want the earth to open up and swallow your porch?" I stared at her. Sinkholes? From a dandelion root the size of a piece of string? Are you hearing yourself? "I hear the sound of property values plummeting," she shot back, standing up and dusting off her hands. She tapped the caliper against her thigh. "You're disrupting the soil matrix. And look at this divot." She pointed a manicured finger at a small, quarter-sized hole where I had successfully ripped a weed out a moment ago. "That is a tripping hazard. If a child were to run across your lawn—" "No children run across my lawn, Patty, because you fined the Johnson kids for excessive velocity last summer." "They were running with intent," she sniffed. She reached into her pocket, the cargo pocket of her caprice, which I was convinced contained a portal to a dimension of pure bureaucracy, and pulled out her citation pad. It was a thick, yellow pad, dog-eared and worn. She uncapped a pen with a sharp click. The sound echoed in the quiet street like a gunshot. "Patty, don't!" I warned, standing up. My knees cracked, echoing hers. I was 34, but living next to Patty Vance aged you in dog years. "I am out here on a Saturday, my only day off. I could be fishing. I could be sleeping. I could be staring at a wall. But I am here, on my knees, wrestling with nature because you said my lawn looked distressed. Do not write me a ticket while I am actively complying with your demands." She didn't look up. She was writing furiously. "Compliance requires competence, David. Intent is irrelevant. Results are mandatory. You are guilty of improper weeding technique and soil disruption level 2. Soil disruption level 2? I laughed, a high, hysterical sound that made a bird fly out of the oak tree above us. Is level 1 just walking on it? Is level 3 a meteor strike? Level 2 is visible scarring of the turf resulting from negligent maintenance, she mumbled, tearing the yellow sheet off the pad with a violent rip. She thrust it toward me. "That's $100 for the technique and $400 for the soil damage. You have 14 days to remediate the lawn surface to a flat plane with 0 deviation." I didn't take the paper. It fluttered to the ground, landing on the very dandelion she had measured. We both looked at it. "Pick it up," she said. "Littering is another 50. I snatched the paper up. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from a rage so pure, so white-hot, that I could feel it buzzing in my molars. I looked at the ticket. $500. 500 American dollars. That was my car payment. That was a weekend trip. That was 500 items off the dollar menu. And she was charging me this because I pulled a weed sideways. "Patty," I said, my voice dangerously low. "We need to talk about this. This isn't about the weeds. This is about the paint, isn't it?" She stiffened. Her eyes narrowed behind the visor. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The beige paint incident of 2022, I said, stepping closer. "When I painted my shutters creamy latte, and you said it was aggressive sand. You've never forgiven me for winning that appeal with the board." "The board was weak that year," Patty hissed. "Greg was the tie-breaking vote, and we all know Greg is colorblind. That shutter color is an abomination. It clashes with the asphalt." "It's beige. The whole neighborhood is beige. We live in a beige hellscape, Patty." I gestured widely at the street. It was true. Oakhaven Estates was a monument to neutrality. Every house was a shade of tan, taupe, sand, or fawn. It was like living inside a cardboard box. "Why are you doing this? I pay my dues. I bring my bins in on time. I even wave at you. Why are you trying to ruin my life over weeds?" "I am trying to save this community from chaos," she declared, puffing out her chest. "It starts with a sideways weed pull. Then it's a non-regulation mailbox. Then it's an RV parked in the driveway for 48 hours. Then it's anarchy. I am the thin beige line, David, and you are crossing it." She turned on her heel, her loafers squeaking a rhythm of authority, and began to march back toward her house, which, of course, was directly across the street from mine. Her lawn was perfect. It looked fake. It was a carpet of emerald green that looked like it had been vacuumed. There wasn't a weed, a brown spot, or a single blade of grass that dared to be taller than its brothers. It was terrifying. I stood there, clutching the yellow slip of paper, feeling the heat of the sun bake the anger into my skin. I looked at my lawn. It was fine. It was a normal lawn. Sure, there were a few dandelions, maybe a patch of clover near the driveway, but it was green. It was alive. It was grass. "Hey, Dave." I jumped and spun around. Greg was standing at the edge of his property line, holding a garden hose but not watering anything. Greg was a good guy, a retired actuary who had lost the will to fight Patty somewhere around 2018. He looked tired. He always looked tired. "Saw the caliper come out," Greg said sympathetically. "That's never good. What did she get you for?" "Angle of extraction," I said, my voice flat. "I pulled the weeds at 45 degrees. Greg winced. "Ooh, rookie mistake. You gotta go 90, straight up, like a rocket launch. She got me for 60 degrees back in 19. Cost me $300. "It's 500, Greg. $500. Greg whistled low. "She's escalating. You know why, right? Because she's a demon sent from the underworld to punish us for our suburban sins?" "No," Greg said, stepping closer and lowering his voice, glancing toward Patty's house to make sure she wasn't monitoring us with a parabolic microphone. "Her nephew. He's looking to buy in the neighborhood. She wants him close, but the market is tight. No one is selling." I stared at him. "So?" "So," Greg said, pointing a thumb at my house. "You have the Norwich floor plan. The nephew loves the Norwich. She figures if she rides you hard enough, hits you with enough fines, makes your life miserable enough, you'll list it just to escape. She's trying to fine you into foreclosure, Dave." The realization hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just pettiness. It was a siege. It was a tactical military operation designed to displace me from my own home so her nephew, who probably measured his cereal flakes before eating them, could move in. "She wants a war," I whispered. "She's already winning the war, buddy," Greg said, patting my shoulder. "My advice? Just pay it. Hire the guy she recommends, Green Thumb Landscaping. They kick back 10% to the HOA social fund, so she leaves them alone. Just surrender, Dave. It's easier." Greg walked away, dragging his hose, a beaten man. I watched him go. I looked at Patty's house. She was standing in her window, the blinds slightly parted, watching me. I could feel her gaze. She was waiting for me to crumble. She was waiting for me to go inside, write the check, and submit. She wanted me to call a realtor. I looked down at the dandelion again, the one I had pulled at 45 degrees. I bent down, picked it up, and stared at the jagged root. "Vertical extraction," I muttered. "Complete removal." A dark, twisted idea began to form in the back of my mind. It started small, like a single weed, but it grew fast. She wanted perfection? She wanted zero tolerance? She wanted to ensure that no noxious flora ever disturbed the soil aesthetics again? I wouldn't just give her what she wanted. I would give her so much of what she wanted that she would choke on it. I walked to my garage and hit the button. The door rumbled open. I didn't go for the lawnmower. I didn't go for the weed whacker. I went to my car. I needed supplies, but not the supplies she thought. If she wanted to play games with calipers and soil density, I was going to change the game entirely. I wasn't going to be a gardener anymore. I was going to be an exterminator. I got in the car, slammed the door, and reversed out of the driveway, making sure to clip the edge of the curb just to annoy her. I wasn't going to the Home Depot. That was for amateurs. I was going to the industrial supply warehouse on the other side of town, the place where the contractors went, the place where they sold things in drums, not bottles. The drive took 20 minutes. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel the whole way. I replayed the conversation in my head. Sinkholes, improper weeding technique, the sheer arrogance of it, the idea that she could dictate the angle of my hand. I pulled into the lot of Build It Right Industrial. It was a gritty place. Forklifts zipped around carrying pallets of cinder blocks. Men with back braces and hard hats smoked cigarettes near the loading dock. I parked my sedan between two massive Ford F-350s that were covered in mud and drywall dust. I stepped out, feeling woefully underdressed in my grass-stained shorts, but I carried the energy of a man with nothing left to lose. I walked up to the counter. The guy behind it was massive. His name tag said Sayel. He looked like he had been carved out of a side of beef. He was eating a sandwich that was the size of a human head. "Help you?" Sal grunted, not looking up from his lunch. "I need tweezers," I said. Sal stopped chewing. He looked up. His eyes, small and dark, scanned me. "Tweezers? You mean like for splinters? We got a first aid kit in aisle 4. "No," I said, leaning on the counter. "I need industrial tweezers. Long ones. The kind you might use to dismantle a bomb, or perform surgery on a very large, very angry badger." Sal stared at me for a long moment. He swallowed the bite of sandwich. "We got 18-inch mechanics forceps, used for fishing bolts out of engine blocks, serrated tips, locking grip, strong enough to crush a finger." "Perfect," I said. "I'll take 2. And do you have knee pads? The good ones. Gel-filled, hard shell." "Aisle 6, Sal said, pointing a thumb. "What are you doing, kid? Building a ship in a bottle?" "No," I said, my voice cold. "I'm gardening." I bought the forceps. They were terrifying. Heavy, cold steel, with teeth that clicked together with a sound that implied violence. I also bought a magnifying glass headlamp, the kind jewelers use. I bought a carpenter's square. I bought a plumb bob. I drove home. I parked in the driveway. I saw the curtain twitch across the street. Patty was watching. Good. I went into the garage and geared up. I strapped on the heavy-duty knee pads. I put on the headlamp. I clipped the carpenter's square to my belt. I walked out onto the front lawn. It was high noon now. The sun was brutal. I didn't just kneel. I assumed a tactical position. I turned on the headlamp, even though it was bright daylight. I crawled to the first dandelion. I set the carpenter's square against the ground next to the weed to establish a perfect 90-degree vertical axis. I took the 18-inch forceps in my right hand. I looked up at Patty's window. I knew she could see me. "You want 90 degrees, Patty?" I shouted at the closed window. "I'll give you 90 degrees." I clamped the forceps onto the weed. I checked the angle against the square. I held my breath. I pulled, slowly, vertically, like I was extracting a fuel rod from a nuclear reactor. The weed came out, root and all. It was perfect. I laid it on the sidewalk like a trophy. Then I moved to the next one. I spent 6 hours out there. Neighbors drove by and slowed down. People walking their dogs crossed to the other side of the street. I didn't care. I was a machine of compliance. I cleared a 3-foot by 3-foot square of grass. It took me all afternoon. I was dehydrated, sunburned, and my knees felt like they were filled with broken glass. But I had done it. I had weeded that patch with mathematical perfection. I went inside, drank a gallon of water, and collapsed on the couch. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I had beaten her at her own game. I had followed the rules so hard that the rules had become a mockery. Monday morning, I went to work. I felt stiff, but righteous. Tuesday, I came home. I pulled into the driveway. I looked at the patch I had weeded. My heart stopped. There, in the center of the perfectly leveled, surgically cleared soil, was a sprout. A tiny green, jagged leaf. A dandelion. It had grown back. In 48 hours. And taped to my front door was another yellow note. I walked up to it, my legs feeling like lead. I ripped it off the door. Violation. Notice. Offense. Recidivist vegetation failure. Description. Homeowner failed to ensure permanent removal of noxious flora. Regrowth observed within 72 hours indicates root mass was not fully excised. Fine. $1,000. Repeat offender surcharge applied. I stared at the paper. The number danced before my eyes. $1,000. Because a plant did what plants have been doing for 400 million years. It grew. I looked across the street. Patty was in her driveway, washing her car. She wasn't using a hose. She was using a spray bottle and a microfiber cloth, cleaning 1 square inch at a time. She looked up. She saw me holding the ticket. She smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered a wounded animal. "Persistence is key, David," she called out, her voice chirpy and bright. "Maybe try a systemic herbicide next time? Oh wait, those are banned in Section 8. Good luck." I didn't scream. I didn't throw the ticket. Something inside me broke. It was a quiet break, like a twig snapping deep in a winter forest. The part of me that wanted to be a good neighbor. The part of me that wanted to fit in. The part of me that cared about property values. It just died. I walked into my house. I placed the $1,000 ticket on the kitchen counter next to the $500 ticket. I opened the fridge and took out a beer. I didn't open it. I just held the cold glass against my forehead. I walked to the living room and pulled the massive 3-ring binder of the HOA bylaws off the shelf. I had never actually read the whole thing. I usually just looked up whatever I was being yelled at for. But tonight, I was going to read it. Cover to cover. I sat there for hours. I read about fence heights. I read about trash can visibility. I read about holiday decoration timelines. And then, around 2:00 a.m., I found it. Section 11, Paragraph A. The homeowner's obligation to vegetation. The homeowner must ensure that no unwanted or noxious vegetation exists within the visible frontage of the property. The lawn must be uniform in appearance. If the homeowner is unable to maintain a weed-free environment through manual or chemical means, the board reserves the right to demand alternative remediation to ensure a pest-free and uniform aesthetic. I read it again. Ensure no unwanted or noxious vegetation exists. It didn't say I had to have grass. It said I had to have no weeds. It said the lawn must be uniform. I looked out the window at the moonlit street, the Oak Haven Estates, a place where nature was the enemy. Patty didn't want a lawn. She wanted a green concrete slab. She wanted something dead that looked alive. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "You want no weeds? You want zero possibility of regrowth? You want to fine me for life, finding a way?" I thought about history. I thought about the Romans. I thought about what they did to Carthage when they wanted to make sure it never rose again. They didn't. Just burn it. That wasn't enough. They cursed the soil. I grabbed my car keys. It was 2:30 a.m., but I knew where I was going tomorrow. I wasn't going back to the hardware store for tweezers. I was going back to see Sal, and I was going to need a bigger truck. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I called in sick, which was technically true if being sick of everyone's nonsense counted as a medical condition. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the $1,500 worth of fines pinned to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a smiling avocado. The avocado seemed to be mocking me. I decided to try the reasonable human being approach one last time. I needed a professional. I needed someone whose job it was to wrestle nature into submission, someone who had seen it all. I Googled landscapers near me and skipped past the ones with polished websites and photos of golf courses. I wanted the guy with a generic truck and a phone number spray-painted on the side. I found a listing for Mikey's Mow and Go. The reviews were solid. Mikey showed up, cut the grass, left 5 stars. Mikey arrived at 10:00 a.m. His truck was a battered Chevy Silverado that sounded like it had a persistent cough. He hopped out, a guy in his 20s with a sunburned neck and a t-shirt that said, "Sun's out, guns out," with the sleeves ripped off. "Yo," Mikey said, surveying my yard. "Grass looks okay, boss. Just a trim?" "No, Mikey," I said, handing him the clipboard where I had attached the highlighted bylaws. "I need a surgical extraction. See this?" I pointed to the recidivist vegetation failure citation. I need every single weed gone. And I mean gone. Roots, stems, spiritual presence. All of it. Mikey took the clipboard. He squinted at the text. He moved his lips slightly as he read. Then he looked up at me, confused. "This says, metal implements prohibited during extraction to prevent earthworm trauma?" "That's Section 9, Paragraph D," I confirmed. "Earthworm trauma?" Mikey repeated. "Boss, how am I supposed to get the roots out without metal tools? You want me to use plastic spoons? My fingernails?" "Patty suggests organic leverage tools made of sustainable bamboo," I quoted. Mikey laughed. It was a loud, barking laugh. "Bamboo? On this soil? This is clay, man. You stick bamboo in this, it snaps. Look." He kicked the ground with a work boot. It was hard as a rock. "I use steel, I use gas, I use poison. That's how landscaping works." "I know, Mikey, but she's watching." I gestured with my chin toward Patty's house. As if on cue, the blinds shifted. "Is that the HOA lady?" Mikey asked, narrowing his eyes. "The one who wrote the ticket?" "That's her." Mikey spat on the ground. "All right, I hate these types. I'll do it. But it's gonna cost you double. Hazard pay." "Done." Mikey went to his truck and pulled out a weed whacker. He didn't even get it started before the front door across the street flew open. Patty marched out, not in her bathrobe this time, but in her full patrol uniform, a reflective safety vest over her floral blouse. She had a clipboard of her own. "Excuse me," she shouted, crossing the street without looking for traffic, assuming the cars would simply stop out of respect for her authority. "Excuse me, sir, you cannot operate a 2-stroke engine before 11:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. It's a noise violation." Mikey lowered the weed whacker. "Lady, it's 10:15. "Quiet hours are strictly enforced for the benefit of shift workers and napping infants," she shrilled, tapping her watch. "And look at your vehicle." She pointed at Mikey's truck. The rear tire was resting exactly 2 inches onto the grass of the curb strip. "You are compressing the root systems of the municipal trees," she gasped. "This is a Tier 3 offense, vehicular manslaughter of public flora." Mikey looked at his tire. He looked at Patty. He looked at me. The veins in his neck were starting to bulge. "Lady," Mikey said, his voice tight. "I'm parked. The tree is fine. I'm just trying to cut the man's grass." "Not with that gas-guzzling pollution machine, you aren't!" She whipped out her phone. "I'm logging this. Unauthorized commercial vehicle, noise violation, environmental hazard, and," she sniffed the air, "is that tobacco?" Mikey was indeed chewing on an unlit cigar. "That is a carcinogenic airborne particulate risk," Patty declared. "I am calling the board. We will have your license revoked." Mikey didn't say a word. He just turned to me. The look in his eyes was one of profound pity. "Boss," he said, "I can't do it. No amount of money is worth this." "Mikey, wait!" He threw the weed whacker into the back of his truck with a clang. He jumped into the driver's seat. "Good luck, man. You're gonna need it. You don't need a landscaper, you need a priest." He peeled out. Patty stood there, hands on her hips, watching him go with a smug expression of triumph. She turned to me. "You really should vet your contractors better, David," she chided. He was clearly unstable. And his truck was leaking oil. "I'll be sending you a bill for the asphalt cleaning." She turned and marched back to her house. I stood there in the silence of the suburbs. The birds were singing. The sun was shining. And I was vibrating with a frequency of rage that could probably shatter glass. I walked back into my house. I went to the fridge. I took down the magnet. The avocado fell to the floor and cracked. I didn't care. I went to my computer. I opened a new browser tab. I didn't search for landscapers. I didn't search for lawyers. I searched for history. I typed in, "How to stop plants from growing forever." The results were what you'd expect. Herbicides. Paving. But then I saw it. A forum post on a gardening site, buried deep in a thread about invasive kudzu. "If you really want to kill it," the user wrote, "you have to salt the earth. The Romans did it. Changes the osmotic balance of the soil. The roots can't take up water. They dry out. Nothing grows for a long, long time." I sat back in my chair. Salt, sodium chloride. It was elegant. It was natural. It wasn't a chemical herbicide in the traditional sense. It was a mineral. It was what we put on French fries. It was what we swam in at the beach. I grabbed the HOA bylaws again. I scanned the prohibited substances list. Prohibited. Glyphosate, atrazine, 2004D, motor oil, bleach. Salt wasn't on the list. Why would it be? Who would be insane enough to dump salt on their lawn? "Me," I said aloud. "I am that insane." But a few shakers of Morton's weren't going to cut it. I had a quarter-acre lot. I needed bulk. I needed industrial quantities. I grabbed my keys. I was going back to see Sal. Build It Right Industrial was busier today. The air smelled of diesel and sawdust. I walked straight to the counter. Sal was there again, this time eating something out of Tupperware that smelled like garlic and old gym socks. "Back again?" Sal grunted. "Tweezers break?" "The tweezers were fine, Sal," I said, leaning on the chipped laminate counter. "But the mission has changed. I need to escalate." Sal put down his plastic fork. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Escalate? What are we talking? Jackhammers? Flamethrowers? I got a flamethrower in the back, but you gotta sign a waiver saying you're using it for agricultural purposes." "No fire," I said. "I need salt, rock salt." Sal frowned. "It's July, kid. We don't sell ice melt in July." "I don't need it for ice," I said. "I need it for seasoning." Sal stared at me, his heavy brows knit together. "Seasoning? You cooking a whale?" "I'm seasoning my property, Sal. I have a vegetation problem, a persistent vegetation problem, and a persistent neighbor problem." I told him the story. I told him about the caliper. I told him about the tweezers. I told him about Mikey and, the tire on the curb. I told him about the fines. As I spoke, Sal's expression changed. It went from boredom to confusion, and then slowly to a deep, rumbling amusement. A grin spread across his face, revealing a gold tooth I hadn't noticed before. "She measured the angle of the weed?" Sal asked, his voice shaking with suppressed laughter. "With a digital caliper," I confirmed. Sal slapped the counter. A cloud of dust puffed up. "That's beautiful. That's pure evil. I hate her. I've never met her, and I hate her guts." "So?" I said. "Salt." "Yeah," Sal said, nodding vigorously. I got pallets of the stuff left over from last winter. It's just taking up space in the back warehouse. Halite, crude rock salt, the good stuff. How much you need? 50 pounds? I did the mental math. I remembered the forum post. You need high saturation. You want the soil to turn white. No, I said. 500 pounds. Sal whistled. 500? Kid, that's not seasoning. That's a biblical event. You trying to recreate the Dead Sea? I want to make sure, I said, my voice steady, that nothing green ever dares to show its face on my property again. I want the ground to be so hostile that worms tell ghost stories about my yard. Sal looked at me with newfound respect. He stood up. I like your style. Tell you what, I got a pallet back there. 40 bags, 50 pounds each. That's 2,000 pounds. It's been sitting there since February. Wrapper is torn on a few. I can't sell it full price. 2,000 pounds? I swallowed. That was a lot. That was a literal ton. I'll give it to you for the price of 500, Sal said. Call it a screw the HOA discount. Us independent contractors gotta stick together against the bureaucrats. I looked at Sal. He looked at me. It was a moment of pure, masculine understanding. Load it up, I said. Getting the salt home was a logistical nightmare. My sedan was out of the question, Sal let me borrow the shop's flatbed truck for $50 cash. We loaded the pallet with a forklift. The suspension of the truck groaned under the weight. I drove home slowly. The truck handled like a boat in a storm. I felt like I was transporting nuclear waste. I pulled into my driveway, backing the truck right up to the garage door. I looked across the street. Patty's curtains were still. She was probably at a board meeting, plotting to outlaw the color blue. I spent the next 2 hours sweating, hauling 40-pound bags of rock salt into my garage. I stacked them against the wall. It looked like a drug bust. Rows and rows of white bags labeled Ice Destroyer, Professional Grade. By the time I returned the truck and got back home, it was evening. I stood in my garage, looking at my arsenal. I needed a delivery system. I couldn't just throw it by hand. It would be uneven. I needed coverage. I needed saturation. I had bought a heavy-duty broadcast spreader, the kind used for seeding large fields. It was red with big pneumatic tires. I poured a test bag into the hopper. The crystals were large, jagged, and gray-white. They rattled as they hit the plastic. I went into the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. I ate it standing up, staring out the window at my lawn. It looked so innocent. The grass was swaying gently in the evening breeze. The dandelions were closing up for the night. Enjoy it while you can, I whispered to the yard. Tomorrow, we enter a new age. I didn't sleep well that night. I had dreams of Patty chasing me with a giant ruler, but every time I stepped on the ground, it turned to sand. I woke up at 5 o'clock a.m. The sun wasn't up yet. The neighborhood was silent. This was it. I went to the garage. I made coffee. I put on my work boots. I put on the knee pads again, just for the aesthetic. I grabbed a pair of safety goggles. I opened the garage door. The sound was loud in the quiet morning, but I didn't care. I dragged the first bag of salt to the spreader. I slit it open with a box cutter. The sound was a sharp zip. I poured the salt in. It sounded like hail hitting a tin roof. I rolled the spreader to the edge of the driveway. I set the dial to maximum opening. I looked at the sky. It was turning a pale purple. Dawn was coming. Operation Dead Sea, I muttered. I started walking. Cranch, cranch, cranch. The spreader flung the rock salt in a wide arc. It hit the grass with a satisfying thwip, thwip, thwip sound. I walked a straight line down the edge of the property. I turned, I walked back. I reloaded. I walked again. By 6:00 a.m., the lawn was covered in a light dusting. It looked like a frost. By 6:30 a.m., I had gone through 10 bags. The grass was disappearing under a layer of white. By 7:00 a.m., the sun was up, and the lawn was gone. In its place was a glistening, crystalline field of white. It was blinding. It was beautiful. It looked like I lived on the moon. I was reloading the spreader, with bag number 20 when I heard the screech. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't a car. It was a human vocal cord being pushed to its absolute limit. "David!" I turned. Patty was standing on her front porch. She was wearing a silk bathrobe with a dragon on it. Her hair was in curlers. She was staring at my yard with eyes that were practically bulging out of her head. "Good morning, Patty," I called out, my voice cheerful. "Just doing some preventative maintenance." She ran down her driveway. She didn't look both ways. She sprinted across the street, her slippers slapping against the asphalt. She stopped at the edge of my property line. She looked down at the salt. She looked up at me. What is this?" she sputtered. She reached down and touched the white crystals. She rubbed them between her fingers. She tasted it. Her face contorted. "Salt? Is this rock salt?" "Sodium chloride, Patty. All natural, from the earth." You are salting the lawn?" She looked around, frantically, as if searching for a hidden camera. "It's July! It's 80 degrees! Why are you salting the lawn?" "Well," I leaned on the handle of the spreader. "You fined me for improper weeding. You fined me for regrowth. You said I had to ensure no unwanted vegetation exists. So I'm fixing the soil chemistry. If the soil is saline, the weeds can't grow. Problem solved. Permanently." "You're killing the grass!" she screamed. "You're killing everything!" "Grass is vegetation, Patty. And honestly, it's been very difficult to maintain to your standards, so I'm opting out. I'm going for a more mineral-based aesthetic." "This is insane! This is vandalism! This is chemical warfare!" She pulled her phone out of her robe pocket. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped it. She scrambled to pick it up. "I'm calling the police! I'm calling the EPA! You are creating a toxic waste site!" "It's table salt, Patty. It's not toxic. It's delicious." "We'll see about that!" she shrieked. She dialed 911. "Yes, emergency! I need police immediately! My neighbor is poisoning the ecosystem. He's dumping chemicals. It's a biological attack. Oakhaven Estates, hurry!" She hung up and glared at me. "You are done, David. You're going to jail. And then, we are going to lean your house so fast your head will spin." I shrugged. I ripped open another bag. Zip. "I'm just going to finish up while we wait," I said. I started pushing the spreader again. Patty stood there, vibrating with rage, watching the salt fly. Thwip, thwip, thwip. It was the sound of freedom. The police arrived in record time, likely because Patty had used the words biological attack. 2 cruisers screeched around the corner, lights flashing. Officer Miller and Officer Ramirez stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. They looked ready for a terror cell. Instead, they found a guy in shorts pushing a lawn spreader and a woman in a dragon bathrobe, hyperventilating on the sidewalk. "Drop the spreader!" Officer Miller shouted. I stopped immediately and raised my hands. "It's empty, officer. I'm just reloading." Miller approached cautiously, eyeing the white ground. "Sir, step away from the chemical agent." "It's not a chemical agent," I said calmly. "It's rock salt, like for driveways." Miller paused. He looked at the ground. He looked at the bag I had just opened. He kicked a pile of it with his boot. "Salt?" "Yes, sir. Ice melt." Patty rushed forward. "He's destroying the environment. He's salting the earth. It's malicious mischief. It's eco-terrorism." Officer Ramirez walked over to Patty. "Ma'am, calm down. Did he threaten you?" "He threatened my property values," Patty wailed. "Look at this! It's a wasteland!" Ramirez looked at my lawn. It was, admittedly, looking very stark. The grass beneath the salt was already matting down, suffocated. The white crystals sparkled aggressively in the morning sun. "Sir," Miller said, relaxing his posture but looking very confused. "Why are you salting your lawn in the middle of summer?" "Officer," I said, putting on my best reasonable citizen face. "My neighbor here, Mrs. Vance, is the president of the HOA. She has fined me $1,500 in the last week for weeds. She demands a weed-free environment. I have tried pulling them. I have tried hiring landscapers, whom she chased away. I am simply complying with her demand to ensure no vegetation grows here. Salt prevents growth. I am saving myself from future fines." Miller blinked. He looked at Patty. "Is that true, ma'am? Did you fine him for weeds?" "Yes," Patty huffed. "But I meant for him to maintain a lush, green, weed-free turf. Not this." "The bylaws don't specify green turf," I interjected, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket. I had come prepared. "Here is the copy. Section 11. Ensure no unwanted or noxious vegetation exists. It does not mandate the existence of grass, only the absence of weeds." Officer Ramirez took the paper. She read it. The corner of her mouth twitched. She looked at Miller. "He's got a point, Frank. It's vague." Miller rubbed his face. "Okay, look. This is a civil matter. It's an HOA dispute. There's no crime here. Salting your own property isn't illegal in this state. Unless, is it running off into the storm drain?" We all looked at the gutter. I had been careful. I had left a 6-inch buffer zone near the curb. "No runoff," I said. "It's contained." "Then there's nothing we can do," Miller said, shrugging at Patty. "Ma'am, you can take it up with the board or civil court. But he's not breaking any penal codes." "You're leaving," Patty shrieked. "He's murdering the soil." "It's his soil, ma'am," Ramirez said, struggling to keep a straight face. "Have a nice day." The officers got back in their cars. As they drove away, I saw Ramirez laughing in the passenger seat. Patty stood there, stunned. Her ultimate weapon, the authorities, had failed her. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and horror. "This isn't over," she whispered. "I know," I said, grabbing the next bag. "I still have 20 bags to go." She turned and fled into her house. I assumed to start drafting a new bylaw, but it didn't matter. Bylaws take 30 days to ratify. I had time. I finished spreading the salt around noon. I used the hose to lightly water it in, just enough to dissolve the bottom layer and soak it into the roots. The reaction was almost immediate. By evening, the green grass was turning a sickly, yellowish gray. It was dying. And it was dying fast. The next 2 weeks were a spectacle. My lawn didn't just die. It petrified. The salt sucked every ounce of moisture out of the vegetation. The grass turned into brittle, brown straw. The dandelions withered into black husks. The earth itself seemed to harden, turning a pale, dusty gray. It looked like the surface of Mars. If Mars was located in a leafy suburb, every other lawn on the street was a lush, vibrant green. Mine was a brown square of death. It stood out like a missing tooth. Traffic on the street increased. People drove by slowly, taking photos. I sat on my porch, drinking lemonade, waving at them. I became a local legend, the Salt Man. Then the letter came. It was delivered by certified mail. I signed for it with a flourish. HOA hearing notice. Violation. Failure to maintain green turf. Creation of an eyesore. Fine. $5,000. Action. You are summoned to the monthly board meeting to answer for the destruction of the property landscape. Failure to restore the lawn to its original condition will result in a lien on the property and potential legal action to force eviction. $5,000. They were going for the jugular, but I was ready. I had done my homework. I had called in a favor from an old college buddy, Aris. Aris wasn't a lawyer. Aris was a geologist. Night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Word had gotten out. Half the neighborhood was there, mostly to see the show. Patty sat at the head table, flanked by the other board members. Larry, the treasurer who slept through everything, and Brenda, the secretary who was terrified of Patty. "Order!" Patty banged a gavel. She looked tired. The glare from my white lawn had apparently been keeping her up. First item on the agenda, the situation at 402 Maple Drive. She glared at me. "David, you have turned your property into a desert. You are in violation of every aesthetic standard we have. You owe this association $5,000, and we demand you resod the entire lot immediately." I stood up. I was wearing a suit. I walked to the front of the room. "Members of the board," I began. "I contest these fines. I was instructed to remove weeds. I did. I was instructed to ensure they did not return. I have. My lawn is the only one in this neighborhood that is 100% compliant with the no-weed policy. I challenge anyone to find a single weed on my property." "You killed the grass!" Patty shouted. "Collateral damage in the war against weeds," I said smoothly. "But I would like to introduce my expert witness, Dr. Aris Thorne." Aris stood up. He looked the part. Tweed jacket, glasses, beard. He carried a small rock hammer for effect. "Dr. Thorne," I said, "can you tell the board about the condition of the soil at my property?" "Certainly," Aris said, clearing his throat. "I have analyzed samples taken this morning. The soil salinity levels are approximately 250 parts per thousand. For reference, the ocean is 35. The Dead Sea is 340. Essentially, the gentleman has created a hypersaline environment. Nothing can grow there. Not grass, not weeds, not trees, not even bacteria, really. It is sterile." The room murmured. "And," Aris continued, "to reverse this, you would need to excavate the topsoil to a depth of at least 3 feet, replace it with fresh fill, and install new drainage. The estimated cost for such an operation would be approximately $50,000. Patty's jaw dropped. "Then he has to pay it." "Actually," I interrupted, "I don't, because there is no bylaw against soil salinity." I checked. There is a rule against noxious chemicals, but salt is a naturally occurring mineral. There is a rule against improper drainage, but my drainage is fine. You can fine me for the grass being brown, yes, but you cannot force me to spend $50,000 to replace dirt that I legally salted." "We will fine you every day until you do," Patty threatened. "We will bankrupt you." "And here is my second exhibit," I said, pulling out a large poster board. I uncovered it. It was a printout of the City Water Conservation Ordinance. The city, which supersedes the HOA, passed a drought awareness measure last month, I explained. It encourages xeriscaping, landscaping that requires zero water, and offers tax credits for homeowners who remove water-hungry grass. By killing my lawn, I am actually a model citizen of the city. If you fine me for conserving water, I will sue the HOA for violation of city ordinances. and I will win." Silence filled the room. The board members looked at each other. Brenda looked terrified. Even Larry woke up. "If you sue us," Larry mumbled, "our insurance premiums go up. We can't afford a lawsuit." Patty looked like she was going to explode. Her face turned a shade of purple that clashed with her blouse. He can't just leave it like that," she sputtered. "It's dirt. It's ugly." "It's not dirt," I corrected. "It's a salt flat. It's geological." "I have a compromise," I said, sensing the moment was right. "I will not resod. The soil won't take it anyway. But I agree that the brown dirt is stark. So I propose a change of landscaping. I will install hardscaping, decorative rock. It requires no water, no weeding, and it is permanently compliant." The board huddled. They whispered. Patty was shaking her head violently, but Larry and Brenda were nodding. They looked at the budget. They looked at me. "Fine," Patty spat, "but it has to be professional. No gravel driveways, high-end stone, and if I see one weed, one single weed, I am foreclosing on you." "Deal," I smiled. I walked out of the meeting. I had won, but I wasn't done. I had one more call to make. The next day, I called Tony. Tony was a paving contractor I had met through Sal. Tony was the kind of guy who looked like he mixed concrete with his bare hands. "Tony," I said, "I need rock, a lot of rock." "What kind?" Tony asked. "River stones? Slate? Mulch?" "No," I said. "I want white marble chips, bright white, the kind that reflects the sun. I want it to look like a glacier landed in my yard." "That's gonna be bright, boss," Tony warned. "That's the point, Tony. I want it to be visible from space." Tony arrived 3 days later, with a dump truck. We laid down a heavy-duty weed barrier, unnecessary since the earth was poisoned, but good for show. Then he poured the rock. It was glorious. 50 tons of crushed white marble. We spread it out over the entire front yard. It was level. It was pristine. It was aggressive. When the sun hit it at noon, the glare was blinding. You couldn't look directly at my house without sunglasses. It acted like a giant reflector array, bouncing the sunlight directly across the street, into Patty's living room. I stood on my porch, shielding my eyes. The heat coming off the rocks was intense. It was a barren, white hellscape. And it was mine. Patty came out. She was wearing sunglasses. She looked at my yard. She looked at her windows, which were reflecting the glare. She looked defeated. "It's compliant," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Zero weeds, Patty," I called out. "Forever." Months passed. The seasons changed. The neighbors' lawns turned brown in the winter, then green in the spring. Mine stayed white, always white, eternal. Patty tried to find violations. She came over with a ruler to measure the size of the rocks. She checked the border for spillover, but I was meticulous. I raked my rocks every Saturday. I kept it perfect. The best part came a year later. I was outside, raking my Zen garden of hate, when I saw a for sale sign go up across the street. Patty came out. She looked older. The fight had gone out of her. "You're moving?" I asked. She sighed. "The glare, David. It's too much. My migraines, and the nephew bought a condo downtown." "Sorry to hear that," I lied. "You know," she said, looking at my white wasteland, "nothing will ever grow there again. You've ruined the soil. I know, I said. I had Dr. Eris check it again last week. He says with the salt saturation and the marble compression, it'll be about 80 to 100 years before the soil can support complex plant life. I've effectively sterilized it for a century. She shook her head. You're a monster. I'm a compliant homeowner, I corrected. Patty moved out a month later. A nice young couple moved in. They were cool. They thought my rock yard was modernist and avant-garde. I still live there. I still have the white rocks. Sometimes on quiet summer nights, I sit on my porch with a margarita. I rim the glass with salt. I look out at my bright, barren, beautiful kingdom. I haven't pulled a weed in 3 years. They wanted a lawn without weeds. I gave them a desert. And honestly, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.